The crowd applauded like it was the unveiling of a miracle, like they'd just witnessed fire brought to Earth. Flashbulbs from camera phones lit the air in flashes of white-blue, casting eerie strobe shadows on the showroom walls. Our CTO, Marcus, smiled from the stage, cool in his ironed blazer, holding the clicker like it was Excalibur. He moved through each slide with that confident cadence, demoing our latest innovation like some digital messiah. Except the thing wasn't ours. It was mine. My stomach knotted into something dense and sour, but I kept clapping. Outwardly calm, every movement of my hands felt like betrayal. My name is Isaac. I'm 34 years old. At least, I was until about 20 minutes ago, the lead back-end developer at a mid-sized tech firm just outside Seattle. We built enterprise tools with sleek interfaces and smart integrations in a culture that boasted about collaboration, like it was a philosophy, not a buzzword. But I was alone when I built that prototype. 14 months of early mornings before stand-up, weekends buried in code, lunch break iterations that turned into full afternoons until someone noticed my desk was still empty during team outings. They didn't see the chaos behind the curtain. They only saw Marcus, standing under the filtered spotlight, taking them on a guided tour of a platform that managed back-end load like it could read your mind because I'd designed it too. I'd made something elegant, modular, adaptive, and they cheered like gods had breathed the idea into Marcus's lungs directly. My job had always been invisible to most people, wiring the architecture no one thought about, optimizing services that only mattered when they failed. And I liked it that way. I didn't care about glamour. I never needed my name etched into product slides or dev sprint retrospectives. I just wanted to build things that worked better than anyone expected. But when Marcus asked me to walk him through the admin interface the night before the demo, a flicker of hope had danced inside my chest. Maybe he wants to finally learn. Maybe he wants to do this right. I explained every detail, showed him how the back end and front end were bridged through a secure event bus I'd authored from scratch. He nodded, took notes. "Don't worry," he said, but he hadn't been worried. He'd been rehearsing. I watched him click through menu transitions he didn't understand. Watched the audience laugh at a real-time permission rollback I'd added as an Easter egg, and heard them mutter things like, "Wow," and "We've needed something like this for years." My face stayed frozen in a smile I hope no one looked at too closely. After the showcase, people flooded toward him like iron pulled to magnet. Even people who had rolled their eyes at resource allocation issues during planning sessions were suddenly praising his vision. The same PMs who once dismissed my early diagrams as too abstract were now gushing about seamless onboarding workflows as if Marcus himself had birthed the stack from napkin sketches. He walked past me to shake hands with one of the VPs from finance, barely nodding in my direction. No thanks. No sideways glance. Nothing. And somehow that was the part I couldn't shake. Not the applause. Not the omission of my name from the keynote. Not even hearing the prototype get nicknamed Marcus OS by someone on the marketing floor. It was the way he looked through me like I was furniture. As if none of me had mattered. Back in my cubicle, I stared at my terminal, fingers hovering above the keyboard, but not moving. The green-on-black cursor pulsed like a taunt. What had I expected, really? This wasn't the first time someone else took credit for back-end development. Most of the world didn't even understand what we did. They saw slick buttons and fluid animations, not the 3 a.m. index optimizations, the 1,000-line migration scripts, or the desperate commits that fixed production at the last second. We were bookkeepers of logic, janitors of digital chaos. Still, I had believed it would be different this time. I had documented everything. Hell, I even wrote unit tests that explained the rationale behind each module design in the comments, like a digital breadcrumb trail. Back to me, I thought if I did my best work, eventually someone would notice. I didn't expect it to be Marcus. But I didn't expect this silence either. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off and the laptop open, watching playback of the demo from someone's social story. Pixelated, grainy, but clear enough to see what everyone else had seen, what I hadn't. Watching it felt like dissecting a dream only to realize none of it was mine. Phrases I'd said almost verbatim floating out of his mouth. Exact phrases, pirated from code walkthroughs, I thought were private, and yet no one questioned it. Behind all that polish and fanfare was the deepest kind of theft, Not of code or features, but of narrative. The story of the product, the sense of whose intellect and sweat made it real, had been reassigned in public without warning and applauded as if it had always belonged elsewhere. I should have felt rage, maybe grief. But what I felt was colder, finer, purpose. The worst part wasn't the applause. It was watching my coworkers applaud him for ideas they had once called impractical, too abstract or too clever by half in Slack threads that now felt like cruel punchlines. I could still remember their replies when I first pitched dynamic privilege negotiation and zero-friction session escalation. "A little overkill, don't you think?" one engineer had said. "We don't have users who would even notice that." And yet, here they were, 3 months later, clapping for the same features, now bundled as adaptive back-end intelligence, a name Marcus had invented 20 minutes before going on stage. Each burst of applause hit me like a code exception checkpoint, pinging against my ribs with mechanical regularity. Memory leaks of betrayal. But I didn't say anything that night. I walked off the floor unnoticed and ghosted the rest of the champagne reception. No one asked where I went. No one even texted. The days that followed weren't filled with confrontation. I'd imagined someone swinging by my desk asking for my thoughts on the demo or what I thought of Marcus's take on the system's architecture. I imagined vague overtures, at the very least coworkers nervously asking if I'd been part of the presentation prep, but what I got instead were weak nods in the hallways and a kind of soft social recalibration. I became invisible, like an emoji in a muted channel. I overheard one of the junior developers mention me during lunch. Weird that Isaac wasn't up there, but he was quickly redirected by someone else, probably scared to point at the man behind the curtain now that the curtain had been sealed shut. A product manager scribbled bullet points on a whiteboard in this breathless kind of awe, talking about modular implementation, parroting the same phrases Marcus had used on stage like he was quoting a holy text, and that call to decouple the auth sandbox completely from the deployment logic. Game-changing. I stared at the line, stunned. I was the one who'd had to fight for that, who'd written half a wiki's worth of justification, not that anyone read it back then. Marcus hadn't even commented on the merge request. That week blurred. I went through the motions. Pushed tiny comments. Answered JIRA tickets with tight, careful language. But I didn't join group lunches or Slack threads unless mentioned directly. And even then I responded like I was coding my answers concise, literal, and devoid of decoration. My smile felt like a skin I was borrowing. My voice was detached, monospaced. Inside, something was shifting. Not splintering or cracking open dramatically, just calcifying slowly into a sharp, cold something. The polite version of me, the one who rationalized other people's ambition as miscommunication, who thought merit would defend itself, it was dissolving. During the Thursday debrief, when the product leadership team walked through potential customer pipelines, Marcus joined the call, late, sipped coffee like nothing had changed, and referred to the demo as my usual proof of concept flow. 4 of them thanked him personally by name, including Jenna, the same PM who once told me, "It'd be better if backend just handed over payloads and let frontend worry about the UX." She looked straight into her webcam. I love how tight the onboarding logic is, no friction at all. Really elegant work, Marcus. I stayed muted, nodded when I had to, but my inner monologue was deafening. I wanted to stand and yell, "You mean the onboarding flow I built? The one you called a time sink and sprint planning?" But I didn't, because I knew something they didn't know. Invisibility in our line of work is a double-edged blessing. Most people don't notice when you build the scaffolding, but they also don't notice when you reinforce it. They don't notice when you tuck hidden logs beneath the surface, when you create traceable patterns embedded into every transaction, when metadata becomes a signature. They only notice what's on stage, but code carries memory. By Friday, the silence around me had grown calcified, not just awkward but permanent, as if my contributions had vanished not just from conversation, but from the company's conception of its own future. Marcus OS was now being referenced without irony during brand syncs. Someone in HR tagged me in a Slack thread about office ergonomics. That was the only mention of my name all week. I walked home that night under a sky the color of rust, every breath filled with the coppery aftertaste of suppressed fury. But I didn't rage. I didn't even crumble. I replayed the demo in my head again, this time like I was debugging a system failure, examining the edge cases, the intervals between scene transitions. And I realized something. Marcus didn't understand the back end. He barely understood the interface I'd given him. His entire walkthrough had been a clumsy rerun of my test patterns. He'd clicked through things in the exact order I had demonstrated the night before, including the places I always hit out of habit, the least obvious paths in the admin console. And if he had followed my path, that meant he'd triggered my logging mechanisms. I sat down at my desk and opened the console. My prototype. My system had been built for security, for provenance. It recorded everything, every dev mode interaction, every admin credential request, every cron job trigger and their user origin. I had time-stamped it all, anonymized to the outside world, but identifiable to me. Marcus hadn't touched the back end, not meaningfully, not in months. And suddenly I wasn't invisible. I was armed. The next morning I stepped into the office calm and alert, my mind already coding the plan in parallel. I brought in coffee like I hadn't just watched my work get hijacked and rebranded. People nodded distractedly. I gave nothing back. My real priority wasn't in Jira or Zoom. That day it was buried in log files and trace events. I tapped into the server hub from a spare conference room. No meetings scheduled there till after lunch. Lights off, door partway closed, laptop powered by muscle memory. I disguised my session as a sandbox diagnostic, a tool I'd built myself, ironically, to help us audit API drift. It wouldn't flag to IT as an anomaly, because I'd written the flagging rules. That knowledge sat on a sticky note in some compliance binder, long since forgotten. The first files I opened read like private journals, access strings, environmental calls, back-end session pings. I filtered the logs by date-time indexes from the demo night, narrowed it again to admin-level IPs. Marcus's credentials appeared, but didn't tell a flattering story. He'd cloned my repo 22 days before the showcase. No local commits. Just browsing, download only. I dug deeper. The testing module timestamps didn't match his public walkthrough at all, but they matched mine. Every interface route he used during the demo aligned with my own test sessions, right down to the seconds. But the jewel was subtler. I had built in a versioning detail into the system output, a hidden field tag designed to echo the current feature branch hash when run in admin mode. Something no average user would ever see. You had to alt-click a specific row in the routing table to produce it. Marcus had done that. During the demo itself, in front of everyone. He hovered just long enough on the component drop-down, gliding over that same admin table where the debug child tag still rendered. I had forgotten to disable it. On the Monday before the big show, I'd left it in by accident. It displayed the branch hash in pale gray text beneath the viewport for a fraction of a second, a ghost to most, unless you're the one who wrote it. I copied the frames, I captured screenshots, paired them with ping logs, and retrieved the server's event timeline. I began organizing them into something more than evidence, something less emotional and more surgical. A paper trail, but rendered in JSON, not Rage. By noon, my diagnostic was halfway built into a visual timeline. I mapped Marcus's access to shallow skin-level calls, non-destructive, nominally technical, and completely performative. And I juxtaposed those with my private test build. You could even see the divergence. Where his directory pull ended, mine continued through 5 more feature branches, where he paused before clicking auth routing. A backlog of my logs spilled through with full insert histories. He hadn't just failed to do the work, he hadn't known what work had been done. I paused mid-scroll only once that day. Around 3 p.m., the same junior developer who'd wondered aloud why I wasn't in the demo, Liam poked his head into the conference room. "Hey, Isaac?" I minimized the terminal window in a breath. "Yeah? They're starting to talk about next quarter architecture. Just figured you might want to be in on that." I nodded slowly. I could tell he wasn't sure whether he was inviting a person or a ghost. "I'll catch up," I said, just tying off some QA threads. He nodded and vanished. I sat there for a long second staring at my screen. It still held the truth marbled into lines of silent timestamp metadata. It was funny. I wasn't planning revenge anymore. Not really. What I was crafting now was more forensic A forensic mirror held up to a company too used to linear credit and loud meetings without measure. By 5, the initial render was done. I made sure the UI was lean, in-house styled, and UTC synced. I borrowed the icon design from our internal audit tool, so no one would question the attachment when I eventually sent it. I embedded the screenshots as hover captions. I built collapsible tiers for each session trace. Then I ran it once, watched it back. Line by line, it followed the paths he took, right up to the moment he clicked the embedded debug mask and exposed the hash log. I recognized my own initials in that hash. I'd peppered them into testing branch names for traceability. Slightly juvenile, entirely effective. I closed the laptop softly and breathed, not hopeful, not relieved, just steady. I hadn't said a word, hadn't raised a hand in a meeting, or dropped a spicy Slack reply. I had just watched, waited, documented. Truth wears no costume. It doesn't need a rebuttal slide. It just sits quietly until someone finally decides to look. All I had to do was make it visible. The next few days were a practice in invisibility. Not because I was being ignored, but because I chose it. While the office hummed with the usual sprint shuffle and Monday stand-ups, I buried myself in terminal windows and version control logs, carefully layering my work beneath the radar. I got in early. Left late. Wore headphones without music, just so no one would interrupt the silence I needed. I created a shell alias that ran the render sequence in under 30 seconds and displayed the timeline in a controlled iframe viewer. No external dependencies, no outbound traffic. It looked like a proprietary dashboard tool. If someone opened it cold, they'd assume it came from ops or security compliance. I even added a footer attribution to internal audit bot v1.3. That version never officially existed. The visual worked. A monochrome heat map of activity overlaid with access nodes, credentials, and session durations. The shorter the node path, the less a user had actually done. Marcus's path was all surface clicks and no depth. My trail, in contrast, spanned like a root system replication triggers, test seeding logs, archived branches, with hashed comments branching out like filaments. I could have kept adding detail, but I reminded myself, simpler meant sharper. There was no need to overwhelm. Just to cut clean. By the end of the third evening, I had written a brief cover summary, neutral, free of adjectives, purely descriptive. It stated the tool's purpose as an internal session mapping test connected to back-end repo interactions in the lead-up to the demo. I signed it as back-end infrastructure lead. Not by name. Not yet. Timing, though, was everything. I waited until the next calendar event landed on the board's shared schedule. Quarterly technology strategy review, Marcus's favorite stage. He always prepared a deck full of stylish infographics and vague roadmaps borrowed from developer blogs. I watched him rehearse it through the glass meeting room doors one afternoon, his hands waving in midair beneath fluorescent lights. Each gesture felt louder than any data point. That night I scheduled the email. Recipient list, board recipient group. BCC'd, subject, internal backend interaction record. Pre-showcase week snapshot. Attachments 1, the sanitized app render. I set the send time for 6:57 a.m. The meeting was at 7 e. The next morning I arrived at the office as the city still rubbed sleep from its eyes. My badge clicked into the side door. No one else had shown up yet. I poured black coffee and opened my laptop, more out of ritual than necessity. The task was complete. The timer on my screen danced toward 0, quiet and inevitable as gravity. I refreshed the boardroom calendar once, then again. The remote call started. I didn't join it. Not yet. I slid into an empty workstation by the window. Plugged in headphones. Pretended to comb through a feature ticket. At 7:03, Slack pinged in my corner screen. Not a message, just the presence dot on Marcus's name flickering from green to yellow, then out completely. I took that moment to open the call. Muted. Video off. One of 30-something anonymous tiles. The audio came in clear. Marcus was speaking, powering through buzzwords. With the grace of someone mid-sprint, talking about modularity and intuitive admin structures. A female voice interrupted. Marcus, before we move forward, Can you verify who implemented the back-end logic for the showcase module? Marcus hesitated for half a breath. We handled that collaboratively. I oversaw the architectural junctions. Another voice cut in. This one measured male. The document we received this morning provides commit logs and session mappings. I'd like clarification on its analysis. I heard him stammer. Not in words, exactly more like a filler noise rooted in throat confusion. I imagined his face, the small twitch near his left eye when challenged. I had seen it before in code reviews. He rushed to defend himself, something about legacy repo permissions. Someone else started sharing a screen. My email had spread. I felt no adrenaline, just a cool quiet buzzing in the folds of my chest. The reaction wasn't explosive, but surgical. Question after question surfaced. Not one shouted. Just pressure and precision, the kind of thing Marcus had never prepared for. I let them talk. Let the timeline speak the words I had never uttered. Behind the scenes, I opened my inbox. No responses yet, but the read receipts told a better story. Every board member had opened it, most within 70 seconds of delivery. I sipped my coffee, let the dial-in drone on, and then I logged out. By the time I got back from the restroom, Marcus was off the call. Not dropped. Removed. His name had vanished from the participant list, like it had never been there. The screen share was still active, though, and someone had zoomed in on the session breakdown for March 14th, the night before his demo rehearsal. One of my scripts had flagged a session logged in as read-only, accessing everything and modifying nothing. The credentials had his ID, but the node trail never touched a single back-end filament. No commits, no test seeds, just shallow replica views dressed up like engagement. A voice chimed in. I recognized it as Dana, one of the quieter board members. She asked if we'd ever run a double-blind peer validation during module development. The pause afterward was long. I doubted anyone in management even remembered what that meant. It was the kind of thing that only mattered during compliance audits and architecture reviews, the kind of detail that made a difference only when everything else fell apart. Someone muttered a date. Another fumbled for a changelog. I sipped the last of my coffee and closed Slack. Then I walked back to my desk, unplugged my headphones, and pretended to review a ticket related to deployment triggers. No one stopped by to ask about it. No footsteps hovered behind me. The office was still warming through its pre-lunch routine, voices drifting from the kitchen and the hum of printer queues, rebooting. About an hour later, an email landed in my inbox. No salutation, just a line from the chair of the board. We'd like a clarity session with you and a few others. Today at 3:15, invite to follow. Attached to it, calendar notification, meeting link, and the subject line, technical assessment, showcase infrastructure architecture, internal only. I accepted without reply. The rest of the day moved in slow layers, each task a distraction designed to keep my nerves from spinning outward. I kept checking the log renderer, skimming it for inconsistencies, as if part of me expected some counter-document to surface from Marcus's side. But nothing came. No edits, no counter-narratives. Just silence. At 3:11, I entered the meeting room off the second-floor hallway, the one saved for small executive check-ins. The projector was already on, casting soft light across a whiteboard still scrawled with a client timeline from last week. Dana was there in person. So was Rajiv, one of the finance heads who rarely spoke unless it involved burn rates. A third seat, empty. I didn't ask who was missing. We nodded in greeting. No one offered small talk. The door clicked shut behind me and Dana began, her voice calm. We wanted a walkthrough of how the interaction renderer works, particularly your integration mapping. She gestured to the screen. They had the dashboard open. My interface. The visual heat map I had quietly built under the guise of compliance protocol. I moved without hesitation, walked through the shell alias, the input parameters, how it cross-referenced internal credential hierarchy with back-end session trails. I clarified what qualified as active development hours, how dev mode access was uniquely tagged to prevent spoofing, and how read-only tokens could be identified by their absence of load triggers. It wasn't just code, it was pattern recognition, shaped like a story no one could fake. Rajiv interrupted only once, asking about audit provenance. All back-end data comes directly from centralized logging services, I said. There's no manual entry, no subjective tagging. His eyes narrowed just a fraction. Then he leaned back. For a minute, no one spoke. Dana closed her laptop slowly. You know why this matters, Isaac. I don't need credit, I replied, but I won't have fiction become policy. She studied me for a long moment. Was this always a one-man system? I shook my head. It didn't have to be. At 3:44, the meeting ended without ceremony. No new job titles, no promises. Just a quiet thank you and a nod and toward integrity that finally felt tangible. I walked back to my desk, slower than before. The office had settled into late afternoon stillness, keyboards clicking less frequently, shoulders slouched deeper into chairs. Somewhere in the building I knew Marcus was cleaning out his space. Maybe not physically, not yet, but structurally. The back end no longer sheltered him in plausible deniability. The logs had painted his silence in numbered lines and time-stamped frames. Nothing screamed. It just sat there, undeniably whole. I didn't know what the board would do next. I didn't care, really. My part was finished. The system had spoken for itself. A few days passed without much change, at least not visibly. There were no announcements, no Slack messages, no status updates pinned to any channels. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. I could feel it, in the way people paused just half a second longer when I joined a virtual meeting, or in the brief eye contact across the hallway that was loaded with realization. Recognition, maybe. The subtle shift of respect from those who once assumed I was part of the furniture. That Friday, my weekly one-on-one with Priya, our team's engineering manager, took a surprising detour. She joined the call a few minutes late, and when the camera switched on, she looked not tired exactly, but careful. We skipped the small talk. We're adjusting some team assignments next sprint, she said. You'll be lead on the new integration initiative. I nodded. Happy to help. What's the scope? Her eyes met mine through the screen. You define it. I sat back. That wasn't something you heard in our company. Scope came from the top or through whatever org funnel the product managers were navigating this month, but not this time. I see, I said. There's also talk of you leading the internal dev architecture guild, she added almost casually, but that'll come through a different channel. Consider this a heads up. I didn't tell her I already knew. I'd seen the access logs last night. Not snooping, not breaking protocol, just maintaining the back-end normalization for our permission schemes. My identifier had been upgraded temporarily. Someone was waiting to make it permanent. When our call ended, I opened my task board. The tickets looked the same. The sprint capacity still showed the vague percentages our PMs used to guess velocity, but now I controlled how much of myself I poured into it. That mattered in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't about revenge or even vindication. It was about redistributing what I had once guarded so tightly. Later that day, I had lunch in the lounge instead of at my desk, something I hadn't done in months. Dana passed by and nodded, then Rajiv followed a moment later, tapping a message into his phone as he walked. Neither stopped, but neither ignored me either. Their acknowledgement existed in the ordinary now, quiet, natural, like the space had accepted me again. By the end of the week, a new staff directory went out. My title had changed. The email was subtle, buried inside a cluster of department updates. No ribbon. No corporate pat on the back. Just 3 new lines under engineering, infrastructure oversight, back-end strategy, long-term systems planning. All under my name. Marcus's name was gone altogether. I didn't search LinkedIn. Someone would tell me eventually, probably with a smirk, but the truth was I didn't feel anger when I thought of him. There was only silence. Maybe pity. He had tried to co-opt a system he didn't understand. He'd underestimated what it meant to build something from the root, files upward. You can fake interface clicks. You can echo language and mimic enthusiasm. But signals leave traces. And systems, when they're honest, always record the final word. The following Monday, I reviewed a pull request from one of the junior devs. She'd implemented a component replication strategy that mirrored something I had once proposed months ago and dropped when no one responded. I left comments, not just approval, but thoughts, suggestions, a few small praises where they were due. I sent the review and watched as she updated it live 20 minutes later. No one stole it. No one polished it into a presentation. It just evolved. Later that afternoon, I got a Slack message from a new hire asking about our dev mode session logs. Not because something was broken, but because he wanted to learn the patterns, wanted to understand what made our system quiet, but thorough, as he phrased it. I smiled and typed a detailed explanation. There was no legacy here I wanted to protect, just process, accuracy, the kind that survives even after names change and org charts reshuffle. That night I left the office without double-checking the repo queue. I didn't review the audit trails again. I walked out as the sun was still faintly touching the tops of downtown buildings, and felt for the first time in months completely finished with something. The structure was sound now, and the truth I knew didn't need a spotlight. It just needed persistence.